A good neighbor is someone you can rely on.
You've been a blessing.
I'm Jane.
Hi, Jane. I'm Joe. Nice meeting you.
He was always trying to help out the people in the neighborhood.
But it doesn't take much for trust
Stay off our lawn!
to turn into hate.
He felt threatened because I think anybody would.
You have no right!
They just kept going after us. They kept bullying us.
I can't do this anymore.
It was like, why can't you just leave us alone?
Urine, feces, that's all you smelt in there.
Get out here!
He had to do what he had to do to protect himself. How low can you go?
To me, they were actually evil. I'm sorry, it was a horror scene.
This quiet suburb of Bedford West is an ideal place to live.
Most of the people owned the homes and had kids. Everybody kind of knew everybody.
It was a pretty good neighborhood. People were good and real friendly.
It's that kind of Texan hospitality that attracted Linda Robinson to the area almost 15 years ago.
I moved there because I wanted to get my children into a stable environment. It was quiet, well kept. It was really great.
My mom was really happy to finally be able to have her own home.
Linda is a widow. Her kids are all grown up, but her daughters, Dorina and Natalie, often come to visit her with her granddaughter, Ashley. Her youngest child, James, hasn't been home in years.
James, as a teenager, got into some trouble and had to leave.
My mom kept it a secret for a long time. No one else knew where my brother was.
So you girls are here to help me?
Yeah, sure.
Since he's been gone, Linda hasn't had a man she can rely on.
How's James? It's okay. Yeah.
Luckily for her, there's a neighbor ready to lend a hand when she needs one.
Cut your grass for you, Linda? It's looking mighty long.
Oh, sure, Joe. Thank you.
Yeah?
You're so kind.
Joe Jackson has been there to help Linda and her family since they first moved in.
Joe was friendly, everybody liked him, and he got along with everybody.
Joe was a nice-looking man. He was very proud of himself. He was a cool guy. He was very helpful. The neighbors trusted him to do different odd jobs for them.
These are the kind of friendships that make a neighborhood great. But they can also destroy it.
Thank you, Joe.
You're
Thank
welcome. You're welcome.
Here's something from you.
No.
Oh, come on.
No.
I insist.
I tried to give money to him because he was a nice neighbor.
But at least, let me clean your eaves.
Oh, of course.
At the time, there was no man around the house. So Joe did whatever I want him to do.
Okay, as long as you're coming for dinner later.
For sure.
All right.
Joe also gets something out of the deal. Companionship.
I know he went through a divorce from his wife, and he was left in the house alone.
I think it was a relationship that Joe really didn't want to see break up, but it did.
Well, he's not completely alone.
Joe really loved his dogs. He would say, hey, my dogs are doing good, and I'm happy.
Yeah. Look at what I got.
And Linda's family provides the human touch.
If it wasn't for my knee, I would have gone pro. Imagine that.
Things were going great with us. He would come over, we would have a good time.
Lately, he needs more than just friendship from the Robinsons.
Linda, can you lend me $20? My divorce is costing me, and I'm kind of strapped right now.
You know, he would ask me if I had change, and I would give that to him.
Oh, sure, Joe.
And I'm sure that was something awful.
I'm really pretty good at it. I can trim.
It seems like Joe requires a helping hand more than ever these days.
Okay.
And Linda isn't the only woman he turns to.
I'll do the trim.
His wife left and took their income with her. He would mow yard for people, I guess, because he didn't have any money.
But Joe always has time for his favorite neighbor.
Well,
The thing is, she suddenly doesn't have as much time for him as she used to.
Oh, hi, Joe. Oh, this is Wilbert.
Linda met Wilbert Walters while out dancing. And it was love at first sight.
When he opened his eyes, he saw me, and it was like, you know.
We hit it off real nice, and she liked what she saw, and I liked what I saw.
Come on in.
Joe doesn't like what he sees.
Joe is our neighborhood Mr. Fix-It.
Mr. Fix-It. What exactly do you fix?
I'm actually a contractor.
He could talk a good game, make you think he worked, but he hadn't worked. He never worked at all.
Joe doesn't approve of Linda's choice in men. And he lets the whole street know it.
Her boyfriend was trying to help her out until this Wilbert guy comes around. I don't know. She just don't seem to be the same Linda I used to know.
Nonetheless, Joe still believes Linda needs him. He's wrong.
Mr. Fix-It.
Hi, Joe. What can we do for you?
Coming to fix your eaves.
Oh, Wilbert already did that. Thanks, Joe.
Okay.
Your services are no longer required around here, man.
He didn't like it too much because somebody was coming and was gonna take over whatever he was getting.
That's when problems started.
Things got out of hand and they escalated.
We were enemies from then on.
The relationship went downhill. There was a lot of tension.
Joe Jackson was always around to help Linda Robinson when she needed a hand.
I insist.
She was always ready to help him out, too.
You've been a blessing.
But now that she's got Wilbert in her life, he's been shut out, and his situation worsens.
He just got to a point that, funds start running out.
He can barely afford to look after himself, let alone his dogs.
$100? 90. It's in perfect shape, man. I just changed the blade.
He had a lot of equipment. He ended up, selling it so he could have his utilities and feed his dogs.
Not even 90. 80? 80, come on. I can't go any less than that.
As Joe's life takes a nosedive,
75.
Linda's begins to blossom.
Come on, help me out here, man.
I felt so bad that he was not succeeding in life like he should. He needed money.
Appreciate it.
But Joe's luck is about to change. A new neighbor is moving in across the street, next door to Linda. Jane Cunningham is a secretary at an engineering firm whose marriage has also recently ended. Joe sees an opportunity.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. I'm Jane.
Hi, Jane. I'm Joe. Nice meeting you.
I see you. I'm just moving in.
Oh, great. Well, I'm usually around. I just live across the street. I'm good with helping people.
What attracted me to Joe first was that he was tall, he was good looking, he was in good shape.
I wouldn't mind giving you a hand. You're
Oh, okay.
new in the neighborhood.
Yeah, that's really sweet of you to offer.
But what I really liked about him is that he's the type of person that would give you his shirt off his back if that would help you out.
And she seemed like a very nice person. She looked like a very responsible woman.
Hey, come on, let's go.
It isn't long before Joe takes up residence in Jane's house. Wilbert doesn't believe love can move that fast, but he believes that Joe can.
Joe Jackson, he know how to manipulate women. He could probably talk an Eskimo into buying a refrigerator, you know.
He can talk you into anything. He was a con man.
Joe immediately steps up to protect his new territory.
Hey! Stay off our lawn! Our lawn?
Between our two driveways is a grassway, and that was my landlord's property.
Hey! Guy is unbelievable.
He asked Wilbur and Linda, please do not drive on the grassway because you're making mud ruts. And they didn't seem to care because they would still drive on it. But we put up a do not trespass sign right there. They drove through the do not trespass sign.
Now that he's the man of the house, Joe sends a clear message to his neighbors.
What is it, hon?
He started putting wood strips with nails
Oh my gosh, be careful, be careful.
in the medium between our houses.
Hey! Leave that alone! It's on my property! Isn't that your boyfriend?
He was going to get me for that.
Despite the tension outside, it's pure bliss inside.
I know.
She had just, got off from a bad marriage, but she met Joe and she was in love.
I know how it is.
It was all about our babies,
They sure love you know that?
But one man's happiness is another man's hell.
This is ridiculous.
When he moved in with her and their dogs, it was just more noise and chaos, of course.
And it's about to get worse.
We should start breeding our dogs.
Good idea.
We can make a lot of money.
Joe doesn't waste any time putting his inspiration into action.
Then he just stopped doing everything. He was concentrating on those dogs.
Before long, his house is overrun.
One time I was sitting out in the backyard and I started counting and I was going, oh no, that can't be right. I counted about 35 dogs. I said, Joe, we got to talk.
You hear all this noise. It was terrible. It was terrible.
Hey! What the hell, man? Can you shut those mutts up?
My dogs! My backyard!
When you just have too many dogs, you can't hardly feed that many dogs in that little backyard without them fighting each other.
And with a lot of dogs comes a lot of mess.
Oh, my God!
And then all of a sudden, it started smelling.
I couldn't even describe to you the smell. It was unbearable.
You gonna do something about that stink? It's killing us, man.
I don't smell anything. You think you can take me?
I said, Joe, it's gonna be me or your dog. Which one he wanted to be?
Do something about your dogs or I will!
Bring it on then.
Oh, yeah!
Yeah, bring it on.
Joe was saying, well, come on. You know, I'll even let you have the first punch, but you better be a good one because I'll be coming up swinging. Take it easy.
Get inside, now!
This isn't over. You hear me? Not even close.
Joe isn't going to let his neighbors ruin his grand plans. Linda and Wilbert aren't going to let Joe ruin their lives. And what makes things more aggravating is Wilbert still drives on Jane and Joe's lawn. Joe is ready for a fight. But Wilbert's not alone this time. Linda's son, James, is back.
Baby!
And he's not the same person who left 8 years ago.
He was different to me because he left at a young age. And then when I see him again, he's a man.
James didn't just go away. He fell in with the wrong crowd and ended up in prison for a minor offense.
I think he did go through something. He wasn't that little boy anymore.
Now that he's returned, things are going to change.
My brother, he's a big dude. He's very intimidating.
I was just horrified by what I was witnessing.
When my brother did come out of prison, he was different. Things were different. He was trying to protect, our family.
After a stint behind bars, James Cole returns home to find his mother, Linda, feuding with her neighbors, Joe and Jane.
It was a culture shock, him coming out. I don't know what he went through while he was incarcerated.
Linda is excited to have her son home again.
Okay. All right, yes.
But Joe's dogs make it tough to celebrate.
If you're not hungry, that's okay, dear. It smells like dog.
The smell was so bad. It just all in your nose. I mean, you didn't want to eat.
I want to go home. I just wanted this to be perfect.
It hurt her. It really did. It was really hurtful.
James didn't reunite with his family to watch his mother suffer.
That's it.
What do you want?
I'm crying because you're dogs.
Nothing wrong with my dog. Get lost, James.
Dogs stink.
come on, I'm gonna drag you out right now. Come on, I'll drag you out. Think you're big and bad with those dogs back there, huh?
It was scary because those dogs, they were so mean that they could break the fence down.
Linda decides she'd better get Joe to clean up his mess before things deteriorate even further.
So I did call the police out, and I pretty much tried to tell them what had been going on. And the officer looked over the fence and say, why? How could you have let this guy do this to you? This doesn't make sense.
Why didn't you do something before now?
I didn't want any problems.
He'd say, well, the only thing I can do, I'm going to go over here and talk to him.
She's the only one that complains about my dogs. This is my property. You have no rights.
He was ugly to the officer. I mean, try to challenge him. The officer had to get really irate with him.
Clean it up, or you'll be hearing from us again. You understand? Last warning.
Fine.
Linda suspects the police visit won't do much good. And she's right. No matter how hard Joe tries, the sheer number of dogs makes it impossible to keep the yard clean for long.
He would pick up all their poop and pee, you know, stuff like that. But hey, that's too many dogs.
Linda and her family can't take much more. Joe and Jane don't see it that way. It's they who are the victims.
They kept bullying us, and I felt like there was nothing I could do. I felt very vulnerable.
And just when things can't get any worse, the unthinkable happens.
All of a sudden, our dogs started dying. We walked out in the backyard, and it was like, oh my gosh. There was dogs all scrunched in like their insides were being sucked up. I was just horrified by what I was witnessing. And they had the symptoms of being poisoned. I'm sorry, it was a horror scene.
It was really heart-wrenching for him. They were his everything.
They were dead. I wanted to send them off so they can be tested to make sure that it was poison that they died of. But we didn't have the money for that.
What Joe does next horrifies the neighborhood.
We dug a pit in the backyard that was in the middle, so it wasn't anywhere near anything. And then Joe would put the dogs in there, and we put some of the hay down. They take forever to catch hold.
Oh my God, he's burning them dogs. I think he started losing himself. He wasn't that man anymore.
He just is in his own world, and
it seems unreal the way, you know, things got out of hand. And I mean, he was different. I mean, he's a different person.
His life had just gone by, and he's over there stuck in mud with all those dogs. I think that really angered him.
Joe doesn't have proof, but still knows who to blame for the sudden death of his beloved animals.
They killed his dogs, and that just made him really, really angry.
He just continued to blame us for whatever he was going through.
It was just a nightmare.
You're big and bad with those dogs back there, huh?
Do something with your dogs or I will!
I've never lived close to what I call evil neighbors before. And to me, they were actually evil.
Joe believes his neighbors have murdered his dogs.
Joe loved all of his dogs, and when they killed them, that was just like somebody killing your son, or your daughter, or something like that, instead of an animal.
Their deaths literally add fuel to the fire.
I'm sorry, but a feud between two neighbors doesn't encompass poisoning animals. That goes beyond feuding. To me, that's cruelty, and yet we couldn't prove it.
The few dogs Joe has left, he guards with his life.
You want some meat for your mutts? It's marinated in something special.
And Joe said he actually would see Wilbur throw something over the fence.
No.
So we figured that, okay, Wilbur's throwing some poisoned meat over the fence.
I would piss him off just for the hell of it.
Hey, you animals! What the hell is wrong with you?
But I never did think about putting no poison in, killing. And I know James didn't. And
that's not what Joe believes. And when he sees his neighbors working on their car, he's convinced he's found the murder weapon.
Murderers! Murderers? What are you talking about? You poisoned my dogs. Are you nuts?
He said that we were throwing antifreeze food over there to the dogs, and this was what's killing them.
You think you can get away with it?
And you're not so tough, Joe Bird.
Boys, come inside. Come.
I never got into it with him. But men, they're not going to do that. They're not going to let you take their territory over.
This is not right. They are poisoning our dogs. I know it's them. Our dogs are dead.
They just kept going after us. They kept bullying us.
I can't do this no more. I can't sleep.
The constant stress takes a toll on Joe.
He started to become a very miserable person. I could see a decline in his hygiene and his clothing. He was depressed.
Joe and Jane don't think it's depression.
He wasn't wearing his gloves when he was taking care of some of the dogs that got poisoned, and he almost died. And I figured, okay, he's got some of the poison in him. After that, Joe didn't seem to be the same.
Joe was determined to catch his neighbors in the act.
Ashley, I just want to see the dog. No, just leave him alone. Come on.
Joe would go out there out in the backyard with the dogs just to make sure nothing would happen.
And you didn't know he was out there. It's like he blended in with the dogs. And he would be looking at you saying,
"You're dead.
I'm gonna shoot you and kill you dead." And he even told my daughter, Natalie, that I'm going to kill everybody in that house.
You and your whole family.
She came in the house hysterical. She could not believe that he could say such a thing. And Mommy, you need to do something about it.
Oh, please, right now. What's wrong? I'm so scared. What happened?
Linda is shocked to see the man she once relied on now turn on her family.
You wonder what was wrong with him. We had been friends since '89, and he had been in my house. He helped take care of my kids.
You and your whole family dead.
And when someone says that, you need to take them seriously. So I went ahead and called the police.
All police can do is give Joe a warning.
She's the only one that complains about my dogs. There's nothing wrong with her.
After that, Linda is left on her own.
They did nothing.
My mom felt like no one was listening to her. No one cared.
It was terrible. Life was terrible.
If the police won't do anything about it,
Joe, get out here!
James will.
After that happened, my brother he just couldn't stand them anymore.
You damn dog! Get out here!
It made him very angry. I think it did something to him.
They broke through the fence and they came in my yard and our yard.
8 years in prison isn't enough to prepare James for what happens next. But he's a fighter.
He fought him off.
James bludgeoned them over the heads.
He beat them. He beat on every one of them to the point where the dogs were bleeding and...
Against all odds, James survives the attack.
He had to do what he had to do to protect himself.
Linda calls animal control.
Hey, pardon me. Please don't take our dogs. I know she's not doing well.
You have no business here, man. This is my dog.
They pulled those dogs out there like they were just a piece of meat. It was just terrible. It was just terrible.
Who called you here anyway? This is not... Give me my dog.
Joe and Jane convince the officers to let them keep their pets.
You can't give her that dog back.
My mom was very frustrated because like no one was doing anything about it.
Joe's not frustrated. He's enraged.
Joe was very angry at my son. I could hear Joe. He said, I'm going to get you. I'm going to get you for this. I'm going to get you.
It really started escalating, just got worse and worse and worse.
Then, on a quiet October morning, the tension reaches a boiling point.
Get you!
I got up and I heard Joe saying, I'm gonna get you, I'm gonna get you, over and over.
Get you, die.
And when James drives over his lawn again, it pushes Joe over the edge.
Hey! I told you to stay the hell off my property.
Let me get on with my day.
You beat my dogs. You've been poisoning my dogs.
No one poisoned your dogs.
I'm not gonna just let you do what you want to do.
We're not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of you or your dogs.
I said to him in the driveway, let's get this over with. I'll be the first one to admit to that.
You gonna shoot me?
And I gave him every opportunity to walk away.
Stay back, Joe.
You're not gonna do anything. Coward.
Then I heard that noise. And I ran out the door.
I can't believe this happened. It just seems unreal that this had happened.
My heart just stopped.
You think you can take me?
Can you shut the nuts up?
You're not gonna do anything.
It was a whole culmination of the feud over several months, you know, and I was just hoping and praying that that day wouldn't come. But it did. It sadly did.
The moment Linda has long feared is finally here.
I think she just had enough. Something must have snapped or something happened.
You're not gonna do anything. Coward.
Her son James and neighbor Joe are at each other's throats.
7 years of this crap I put up with. I said, you done a lot of things to me. You done a lot of things to my dogs.
You've been poisoning my dogs.
No one poisoned your dogs.
But on that 23rd of 2013, it's escalated.
We're not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of you or your dogs. You gonna shoot me?
You told me that I'm gonna kill you and I want to take it and kill you with it. Just like the first time he threatened me. Then he said something that kind of got underneath my skin. After he killed me, he was gonna wait for my girl.
You're not gonna do anything.
They felt like they had the right to poison my dogs. They were gonna teach me a lesson. So I was always the bad guy. All right, they would kill my animals. Hell, they damn like to kill me.
Coward.
Oh, you threatened me several times. It's not the first time you threatened me. I never done anything. I'm the enemy.
James! I saw my son laying in the street. And I screamed. He had blood on his neck. And he was, Mama, go back inside.
My wife got a gun.
James did not care what happened to him. He did not want anything to happen to me. I said, I know what you did. I know you did this.
Go back in your house.
And that's when I started screaming and hollering to anybody who could hear me. Dial 911.
Somebody call 911.
And I was just holding his hand. So he wouldn't die alone. And he got on his phone and called Jan and say,
I just shot him. I think I killed him.
And I'm going, killed who? Shot who? What are you talking about?
Joe, what do you mean? Who did you shoot?
My heart just stopped.
Gene, you're gonna have to come take care of the dogs.
Nice and easy. Turn around.
As paramedics rush to save James, Joe is taken into custody. Authorities have to wait until the dogs are removed from the home before they can enter it. What they see shocks them.
it was just thick and nasty. It was terrible, terrible.
Out of all that time, we've been calling the cops because it take this for them to show up and do something. The system failed us.
How can anyone live here?
I couldn't imagine how Jane and Joe lived in that house. The smell, the yard, and everything was just deplorable.
James survives, but his life is changed forever.
They had the ventilator on and these tubes and everything, and then for the nurse to tell me that he would never walk again. And I just thought.
Linda's son is left paralyzed from the waist down.
Just when I see him, it just breaks my heart. He went from one prison to another, and now he's a prisoner in his own body.
Joe Jackson is sentenced to 7 years for aggravated assault.
What they got me, they took all our dogs. They took what I loved from me. I thought everything was fine. I never bothered these people. It hurts to know that I have always been an outstanding citizen to help anybody, and these people did what they did to me, and I'm the criminal. I'm the one that's sitting in this hole.
Linda knows who the real victim is.
He told me, Mom, I'm gonna walk again. But it didn't happen. He started calling himself a cripple. I'm a cripple. And this is your fault, your neighbor.
It was supposed to be just another showing. A quiet house. A polite smile. A quick walk through. 15 minutes, maybe less. Then back to the car, a quick laugh with her boyfriend, and another story to tell about a strange client with a strange accent. That's how it should have ended. Instead, the front door would remain closed. And inside that house, behind walls that had never witnessed violence before, something precise, something deliberate, something terrifyingly controlled unfolded in silence. No screams that neighbors could later recall. No frantic footsteps echoing through the hallway. No overturned furniture, no chaotic struggle that would suggest panic. Just a series of moments, measured, efficient, and irreversible, that would end a young woman's life before anyone even realized something was wrong. By the time concern turned into action, it was already over. When the door finally opened again, it did not reveal a confused client or a delayed conversation. It revealed stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't belong in a living room. The kind that clings to the air and refuses to leave. The kind that tells you, without words, that something has been taken, and it is not coming back. She had been alive just minutes earlier. Walking. Talking. Trusting. And then, gone. What makes this case so deeply unsettling is not just the brutality of the act, but the absence of everything else. No clear suspect. No obvious motive. No trace left behind that could be followed, unraveled, understood. It was as if the people responsible had stepped into reality for a single purpose, executed it flawlessly, and then dissolved back into nothing. They arrived as strangers. They left as ghosts. And in between those two moments, they committed a murder so clean, so controlled, that even years later, it still resists explanation. Because this was not random. There was no desperation in it. No heat-of-the-moment decision. No signs of rage spiraling out of control. Every detail suggests intention. Planning. Patience. Whoever walked into that house knew exactly why they were there, exactly who they were meeting, and exactly how it would end. That realization changes everything. It transforms a tragic death into something colder, something heavier. Because if it was planned, then she was chosen. Not by chance. Not by opportunity. But by design. And that raises a question that lingers long after the crime scene was cleaned, after the headlines faded, after the investigation slowed to a quiet, unresolved hum. Why her? What did she know? Who had noticed her? What thread, so small it might have seemed meaningless at the time, had quietly connected her to something dangerous? Or was it something even more unsettling? Was she simply in the wrong place but at the exact right time for someone else's plan? The timeline itself is almost impossible to comprehend. Minutes. That's all it took. From the moment she stepped inside, alive and unaware, to the moment everything was over. A window so narrow it feels unreal. A span of time so brief that it leaves investigators with more questions than answers. Because within those minutes, something had to unfold. Words had to be exchanged. Distance had to be closed. A weapon had to be drawn. Decisions had to be made, or perhaps, decisions that had already been made long before that night simply had to be carried out. And yet, no one heard anything. No neighbor reported a disturbance. No passing car slowed down. No flicker of suspicion appeared until it was far too late. It is the quietness of it all that lingers. Violence, in most cases, is messy, loud, emotional. It spills over into the environment, leaves traces not just in physical evidence but in memory, in what people hear, what they notice, what they remember later with a shiver. But this was contained. As if the house itself had been sealed off from the world for those few minutes, holding everything inside, allowing nothing to escape. And then, just as suddenly, it was over. The killers, because there was more than one, walked out. Calmly, carefully, without rushing, without drawing attention. They had arrived looking like ordinary people. Well-dressed, soft-spoken, convincing enough to be trusted. Convincing enough to be welcomed inside. And when they left, they carried nothing visible with them. No stolen items. No obvious signs of what had just occurred behind those walls. Only the knowledge that what they had come to do was done. That detail, perhaps more than any other, is what makes this case so chilling. There was no theft. No attempt to disguise the crime as something else. Nothing to suggest impulse or opportunity. This was not about taking something. It was about ending someone. And when investigators began to piece together those early fragments, the phone call, the strange urgency, the carefully constructed identities of the supposed buyers, a pattern began to emerge. Not a clear one, not a complete one, but enough to hint at something deeper beneath the surface. Because the meeting itself had been arranged. Engineered. The house wasn't randomly chosen. The time wasn't accidental. The victim wasn't simply unlucky. Everything pointed toward orchestration. Which means that somewhere, at some point before that night, a decision had been made. A decision that set all of this into motion. A phone call placed from a number that would lead nowhere. A voice deliberately altered, crafted to obscure rather than reveal. A story convincing enough to pass scrutiny, yet vague enough to leave no trail. Each step was a layer. Each layer designed to protect what lay beneath. And at the center of it all was a young woman who had no reason to believe she was stepping into danger. That's what makes the opening moments of this story so difficult to sit with. Because there is no visible threat. No shadow lurking at the edge of the frame. No instinctive warning that something is wrong. Just a normal evening. A routine appointment. A professional obligation carried out the way it had been many times before. It's only when you look back, when you already know how it ends, that the unease begins to creep in. The rushed request. The unfamiliar clients. The subtle discomfort that led her to ask someone to wait outside, just in case. Tiny details. Easy to dismiss in the moment. But together, they form the outline of something that, in hindsight, feels impossible to ignore. And yet, even with those details, nothing could have prepared anyone for what would happen inside that house. Because this wasn't just a crime. It was a performance. A carefully staged encounter in which every role was played to perfection. The buyers. The agent. The waiting car outside. Each piece placed exactly where it needed to be. Until the moment came. And then, without warning, the script changed. What happened in those final minutes remains, in many ways, unknowable. There are no witnesses to fill in the gaps. No recording to replay. No definitive sequence of events that can be laid out from beginning to end. Only the result. Only the silence that followed. Only the lingering sense that whatever took place inside that house was not chaotic, not accidental, but controlled with a precision that is both impressive and deeply disturbing. Because control implies experience. It implies forethought. It implies that whoever did this had done more than just imagine it. They had prepared for it. And when the moment arrived, they executed it without hesitation. That is the true horror of this case. Not just that a life was taken, but that it was taken so cleanly, so efficiently, that the world outside barely noticed until it was too late. No alarms. No interruptions. No second chances. Just a door that closed and then opened again to a reality that could never be undone. And as we begin to step deeper into this story, into the life that was lost, the investigation that followed, and the questions that still remain, we have to hold on to that image. A quiet house. A brief meeting. A disappearance measured not in miles, but in moments. Because everything that comes next, every theory, every suspect, every unanswered question, all of it begins there. In those 15 minutes. 15 minutes that would become one of the most haunting mysteries in modern Canadian history. 15 minutes that, even now, refuse to give up their secrets. And perhaps most unsettling of all. 15 minutes that prove how little time it takes for everything to change. Victoria, British Columbia is the kind of place people describe with a softness in their voice, as if even the act of speaking too loudly might disturb its balance. Nestled at the southern tip of Vancouver Island, it carries an atmosphere that feels almost suspended in time. Tree-lined streets curve gently around quiet neighborhoods, where houses sit comfortably behind trimmed hedges and wide windows reflect the shifting coastal light. There is a rhythm to the city that leans toward calm rather than chaos, a place where routines are predictable and life rarely demands urgency. It is not the kind of place where violence feels at home. On most evenings, especially in early February, the air carries a cool dampness from the Pacific. The sky settles into a soft gray long before night fully arrives, and the streets grow quiet in a way that feels natural, not empty. Porch lights flicker on one by one, illuminating driveways and front steps. Inside, families gather for dinner, televisions hum in the background, and the outside world slowly fades into stillness. Sanik, the district where the events of that night would unfold, reflects this quiet even more deeply. It is a residential area known for its safety, its stability, and its sense of quiet affluence. The homes are not extravagant in a flashy way, but they carry a certain understated elegance, clean architecture, open layouts, and an emphasis on space and privacy. These are houses designed for comfort, for long-term living, for the slow accumulation of memories. The property at the center of this story stood like many others in the area. A modern home, well kept, with a welcoming exterior that gave no indication of what it would eventually become. Its front entrance opened into a clean, carefully staged interior, the kind of space that real estate agents know how to present with subtle precision. Every detail is intentional in a showing, the lighting adjusted to feel warm but not dim, the air fresh, the surfaces clear of clutter but not devoid of personality. It is a space designed to invite imagination, to allow potential buyers to picture themselves living there. On the surface, it was just another listing. And yet, when viewed through the lens of what would happen, the house begins to feel different. Not because anything about it changed, but because of how it would be used. It would become a setting not for a new beginning, but for an ending. A place where normal expectations, conversation, negotiation, polite observation would be quietly replaced by something far more deliberate. The real estate industry, especially in a city like Victoria, relies heavily on trust. Agents meet strangers regularly. They walk into empty houses with people they have never met before, often alone. There is an unspoken agreement that these interactions are safe, that professionalism and social norms act as a kind of invisible protection. Most of the time, that assumption holds true. It becomes part of the routine, something so ingrained that it is rarely questioned. But that trust is also a vulnerability. And on February 2, 2008, that vulnerability would be exposed in a way that no one in that community had fully considered before. The days leading up to that evening did not carry any obvious signs of what was coming. There were no public warnings, no reports of suspicious activity that might have set anyone on edge. Life moved forward as it always did. People went to work, ran errands, met friends. The quiet normalcy of the city remained intact. Somewhere within that normalcy, however, a plan was already in motion. It began, as many carefully constructed crimes do, with something simple. A phone call. Not loud or threatening, not urgent in a way that would trigger immediate alarm, but deliberate in its tone. The kind of call that fits neatly into a professional context, that asks for a service rather than demanding attention. It was the first move in a sequence that had likely been considered long before it was executed. What makes this moment so important is not just that the call happened, but how it happened. The choice of a prepaid phone. The decision to obscure identity. The subtle manipulation of voice and accent. These are not impulsive decisions. They are choices made with awareness, with an understanding of how investigations work, how traces are followed, how identities are uncovered. Whoever made that call was thinking ahead. And not just one step ahead, but several. The request itself was tailored in a way that would ensure cooperation. A high-value property. A sense of urgency. A client who appeared serious and financially capable. In the world of real estate, these are signals that prompt action. They create an incentive to respond quickly, to accommodate, to prioritize the showing. It is a system built on opportunity. And in this case, that system was used against itself. The chosen location was not random either. Sanic offered something important: privacy without isolation. A neighborhood quiet enough to avoid unnecessary attention, but not so remote as to raise suspicion. A house that could be accessed easily, entered without difficulty, and left just as smoothly. Everything about the setting worked in favor of whoever was orchestrating this. Even the timing carried significance. Early evening, when daylight begins to fade but the night has not fully taken hold. A transitional period where visibility is limited, where movement is less noticeable, where the line between public activity and private space becomes blurred. It is in these in-between moments that things can happen unnoticed. And perhaps most unsettling of all is how seamlessly this planned intrusion fit into the existing structure of everyday life. Nothing about it required breaking in, forcing entry, or drawing attention. The door would be opened willingly. The interaction would begin with polite conversation. There would be no immediate indication that anything was wrong. That is what makes the setting so critical to understanding the crime. Because the environment did not resist it. It allowed it. The house, the neighborhood, the profession, all of these elements created a framework that the perpetrators could move through without friction. They did not have to disrupt the system. They simply had to step into it and follow its rules until the moment they chose to break them. When you look at it this way, the crime begins long before the night itself. It begins in the decisions that shaped the environment. In the assumptions people made about safety. In the routines that felt too ordinary to question. In the quiet confidence that places like Sanic inspire in the people who live and work there. That confidence is not misplaced. It is built on years of stability, on a community that, for the most part, functions exactly as it should. But it is precisely that stability that can be exploited, because it lowers defenses. It creates a space where caution feels unnecessary, where the unexpected feels unlikely. And yet, the unexpected was already on its way. Somewhere, someone had chosen this city, this neighborhood, this house. They had studied enough, planned enough, understood enough to know that what they were about to do could be done here. Not in chaos, not in noise, but in quiet. In control. As the evening approached, nothing outwardly changed. The streets remained calm. The houses stood as they always had. Lights turned on behind curtains, casting soft glows into the darkening air. Cars passed occasionally, their presence brief and unremarkable. To anyone looking from the outside, it was just another night in a peaceful part of Canada. But within that calm, a collision of realities was about to occur. One defined by routine, trust, and normalcy. The other defined by intention, deception, and violence. And they were about to meet at a single point. A single address. A single moment in time. The setting had been chosen. The stage had been prepared. And without anyone realizing it, everything was already in place. There are lives that leave behind noise, and there are lives that leave behind echoes. The difference is subtle, but it matters. Noise fades quickly. Echoes linger, repeating themselves in quiet moments, in memories that return without warning, in the spaces where someone used to be. The life of Lindsay Buziak belongs to the second kind. At 24, Lindsay existed in that fragile space between becoming and arriving. Old enough to have built something of her own, young enough to still be reaching toward something more. The kind of age where ambition feels close enough to touch, where every decision seems to carry weight, where the future is not a distant concept but something actively taking shape day by day. She worked as a real estate agent in Victoria, a profession that demands a particular blend of confidence and warmth. It requires the ability to walk into unfamiliar spaces and make them feel inviting, to meet strangers and quickly establish trust, to guide people through decisions that are both deeply emotional and financially significant. It is not just about selling houses. It is about reading people, understanding what they want even when they struggle to articulate it, and helping them imagine a life that does not yet exist. Lindsay had a natural ease in that role. Not the kind that feels practiced or forced, but something more instinctive. She knew how to speak without overwhelming, how to listen without appearing passive. There was a brightness to her presence, something that made interactions feel lighter, more comfortable. People noticed it, even in brief encounters. It was the kind of quality that cannot be taught, only carried. Outside of work, her life moved along the familiar paths of someone building a future. Relationships, friendships, family ties, all woven together into something that felt stable, even if it was still evolving. She was close with her parents, connected to a network of people who knew her not just as a professional, but as a daughter, a friend, someone whose absence would be felt in ways that go far beyond headlines or case files. There are small details that often get lost in the retelling of cases like this. The ordinary pieces that make a person real. The routines that fill their days. The habits that seem insignificant until they are no longer there. The way she might have checked her phone in the morning, scrolling through messages before getting out of bed. The quiet moments before a showing, sitting in her car, mentally preparing, adjusting her expression in the rearview mirror. The conversations that had nothing to do with work plans for the weekend, jokes shared over coffee, the easy rhythm of everyday life. These details do not change what happened. But they change how we understand what was lost. Because when a life is reduced to the circumstances of its ending, something essential disappears. The complexity, the individuality, the sense that this was not just a name attached to a case, but a person moving through the world with intention, with connections, with a future that extended far beyond a single night. In the days leading up to February 2nd, there was nothing outwardly alarming about Lindsay's life. No visible signs of fear, no indication that she believed herself to be in danger. If anything, things seemed to be progressing. Work continued. Appointments were scheduled. Life moved forward in the way it always had. And yet, there were subtle moments, small shifts that only gain significance in hindsight. The phone call, for example. When it first came, it was simply part of the job. A potential client reaching out, expressing interest, asking questions. But there was something about it that lingered. Something that did not quite settle into the usual pattern of interactions she was used to. The voice on the other end carried an accent, described later as European. Not strong enough to be immediately identifiable, but distinct enough to stand out. The request itself was straightforward on the surface, but there was an urgency beneath it, a push to move quickly, to arrange a showing without the usual back and forth that often accompanies high-value property transactions. These were not red flags in the traditional sense. Not enough to refuse. Not enough to escalate. But enough to create a slight discomfort, a feeling that something was just a little off. It is important to understand how easily that feeling can be dismissed. In professional settings, especially ones that rely on maintaining client relationships, there is often a tendency to override instinct in favor of obligation. To assume that any unease is simply part of the job, something to be managed rather than acted upon. Lindsay did not ignore that feeling entirely. She adjusted. She made a decision that, in another context, might have been seen as overly cautious, but in this case feels like a quiet acknowledgement that something was not entirely right. She asked her boyfriend to come with her. Not to accompany her inside, not to intervene, but simply to be there. To wait outside, to remain nearby, to exist as a presence just beyond the immediate interaction. It was a compromise between instinct and responsibility. A way to maintain professionalism while also creating a layer of security. That decision reveals something important about her state of mind. She was not reckless. She was aware. She recognized, at least on some level, that the situation was different enough to warrant caution. And yet, even with that awareness, there was no indication that she believed she was walking into real danger. Not the kind of danger that would end her life within minutes. Not the kind of danger that had been carefully constructed long before she ever picked up the phone. Because if she had believed that, she would not have gone inside. No one would. That is what makes this part of the story so difficult to sit with. The knowledge that she took steps to protect herself, and that those steps, while reasonable, were not enough. It speaks to the nature of what she was facing. This was not a situation that could be avoided with simple caution. It was not a threat that revealed itself clearly or early enough to be recognized for what it truly was. It was something designed to appear normal, to pass through the filters of judgment and experience without triggering alarm. And it worked. In the hours before the showing, there were likely moments of normalcy that felt indistinguishable from any other day. Conversations that carried no weight beyond the present. Plans that extended into the future without hesitation. A sense of continuity that made what was coming feel impossible, even in retrospect. That is the quiet cruelty of cases like this. There is no dramatic shift, no visible turning point where everything changes. Just a continuation of the ordinary, right up until the moment it ends. When Lindsay prepared for that evening, she was stepping into what she believed was a routine part of her work. Another client. Another house. Another opportunity to move forward in a career she was building piece by piece. She could not see the larger pattern forming around her. She could not know that the people she was about to meet were not who they claimed to be. She could not know that the interaction she was preparing for had already been decided, down to its final outcome, by someone else. And perhaps most haunting of all, she could not know that the precautions she had taken, the decision to not be entirely alone, the awareness that something felt slightly wrong would become part of the story later, a detail that suggests how close she came to avoiding it. Without ever having the chance to fully escape it. In remembering her, it is easy to focus on that final decision, to examine it, question it, wonder what might have happened if something had been done differently. But that line of thinking, while natural, misses something essential. The responsibility does not lie with her choices. It lies with the people who created the situation in the first place. Who constructed the illusion. Who exploited trust. Who turned a routine professional interaction into a trap. Lindsay's story is not defined by a mistake. It is defined by the fact that she was placed into a position where no reasonable decision could have guaranteed her safety. And that is what makes her life, and her loss, resonate so deeply. Because it reminds us that danger does not always announce itself. That it can exist beneath the surface of the ordinary. That it can take the shape of something familiar, something expected, something that does not immediately register as a threat. And that even those who are aware, who are cautious, who take steps to protect themselves, can still find themselves facing something they were never meant to encounter. Her story, like so many others, does not begin with violence. It begins with a life. A life that was moving forward. A life filled with plans, connections, and moments that mattered. A life that, on that February evening, was still unfolding. Until it wasn't. The evening of February 2nd, 2008 did not arrive with urgency. It settled in slowly, like so many winter evenings in Victoria, carrying with it that familiar dimming of light that blurs the edges of everything. The sky lowered into a muted grey, and the air outside held that quiet chill that seeps into your clothes if you stand still for too long. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting pale halos onto sidewalks that remained mostly empty. It was an ordinary night, indistinguishable from dozens that had come before it. Inside her car, Lindsay Busiak was preparing for what should have been a routine showing. There is a certain rhythm to these moments for real estate agents. A brief pause before stepping out. A quick mental checklist. Keys, phone, details of the property. A glance in the mirror, not out of vanity, but professionalism. Presentation matters. First impressions matter. Everything about the interaction is part of the experience being offered. But this time, there was something else layered beneath that routine. Not fear. Not panic. Just a faint tension that refused to fully dissolve. The kind of feeling that doesn't stop you, but makes you hesitate for half a second longer than usual. The kind of feeling that leads you to double-check something, even when you know it's already been checked. Her boyfriend sat in a separate car nearby, exactly as planned. Close enough to see the front of the house, far enough to give her space to do her job. It was a simple arrangement, one born out of instinct rather than certainty. He was there as a precaution, not because either of them believed something serious would happen. From where he sat, everything looked normal. The house stood quiet, its windows dark except for the soft interior lighting prepared for the showing. The neighborhood around it carried on in its usual calm. No unusual movement. No sign that anything was about to break that stillness. Then they arrived. A couple, just as expected. They did not rush. They did not draw attention. They moved with a kind of quiet confidence that blended seamlessly into the setting. Well-dressed, composed, the kind of people who would not seem out of place in a neighborhood like this. Their appearance matched the story they had presented over the phone. Affluent, serious, interested. There was nothing visibly wrong. And that is what made them so effective. Lindsay greeted them the way she had greeted countless clients before. A polite smile. A brief exchange of words. The kind of small talk that fills the space before the actual business begins. There is a choreography to these interactions, subtle but consistent. Introductions, a few questions, a gesture toward the front door. Then she led them inside. The door closed behind them with a soft, unremarkable sound. From the outside, nothing changed. Her boyfriend remained in the car, watching, waiting. At first, there was no reason to feel concerned. Showings take time. People move through rooms at different paces. Conversations stretch, questions arise. 15 minutes is not unusual. Sometimes it is barely enough. Inside the house, however, something shifted. What exactly happened in those next moments is something no one can describe with certainty. There are no witnesses, no recordings, no definitive timeline that captures each step as it unfolded. Only the outcome remains, and from that outcome, investigators have tried to reconstruct the sequence of events. But even reconstruction has its limits. What can be said is this: whatever happened, it happened quickly. There was no prolonged struggle that left the house in disarray. No signs of a chaotic fight spilling from room to room. The violence, when it came, was contained. Focused. Directed. At some point, the distance between them closed. Words may have been exchanged. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the shift was sudden, without warning, without explanation. One moment a conversation, the next something else entirely. A weapon was produced. A knife. Not improvised, not found within the house, but brought with intention. Chosen. Carried. Ready. That detail alone changes the nature of everything. Because it means the possibility of violence was never a question. It was a plan. The attack itself was brutal, but not uncontrolled. Multiple stab wounds, delivered with force and precision. Enough to ensure the outcome, enough to leave no doubt about the intent behind them. And yet, despite the violence of the act, there was no outward explosion of chaos. No broken furniture, no shattered glass. The house did not bear the marks of panic. It held the marks of something far more deliberate. This was not an argument that escalated. This was an execution. Time, in moments like this, becomes difficult to measure. Seconds stretch, compress, disappear. What might have felt like an eternity from within could have passed in just a few minutes. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had changed. Cars drove by. Lights remained steady. The quiet of the neighborhood held. Inside, everything was already over. When the attackers were finished, they did not rush out in panic. There is no indication of that kind of urgency. Instead, everything suggests a controlled exit. A departure that mirrored their arrival. Calm. Composed. Unremarkable. They left the house the same way they entered it. Through the front door. And then they were gone. No one stopped them. No one questioned them. No one, at that moment, even realized what they had done. Back in the car, her boyfriend waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. At first, there was patience. Then curiosity. Then something else began to creep in. A subtle unease, difficult to define but impossible to ignore. It was taking longer than expected. Long enough to feel wrong. He watched the house, looking for movement. A shadow in the window. A figure approaching the door. Any sign that the showing was still in progress. There was nothing. The stillness that had once felt normal now felt heavy. Time stretched. The decision to wait gave way to the need to act. When he finally stepped out of the car and approached the house, the world had already shifted, even if he didn't yet know it. The distance from the driveway to the front door is not far, but in that moment, it carried a weight that would only become clear later. He reached the entrance, opened the door, and stepped inside. What he found was not a delayed showing, not a conversation that had gone longer than expected. It was the end of one. Lindsay lay inside, her life already gone, the space around her holding the aftermath of what had taken place just minutes before. There is a particular kind of silence that exists in moments like that. It is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something else. Shock. Disbelief. The mind struggling to reconcile what it is seeing with what it expects to see. Because nothing prepares you for that transition. One moment, everything is normal. The next, it is not. And there is no gradual shift between the two. Only a break. A clean, irreversible break. Emergency services would be called. The house would soon fill with movement, with voices, with the structured urgency of people trying to piece together what had happened. But in that first moment, before all of that, there was only the realization. That something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. That the people who had walked into that house were not who they claimed to be. And that they had left behind more than just questions. They had left behind a scene that would challenge investigators for years. Because what happened inside that house was not just an act of violence. It was a carefully executed event. One that began with a simple meeting. And ended in a way no one outside those walls could have imagined. All within 15 minutes. 15 minutes that would fracture the illusion of safety that surrounded that quiet neighborhood. 15 minutes that would transform an ordinary house into the center of a mystery that, even now, refuses to be solved. And as the night deepened and the first wave of shock spread outward from that address, one thing became painfully clear. Whoever had done this had not acted on impulse. They had come with purpose. And they had left exactly as they intended. Without a trace. By the time the first officers arrived, the house no longer belonged to the quiet rhythm of the neighborhood. It had shifted into something else entirely, a sealed space suspended between what had just happened and what needed to be understood. Patrol cars pulled in without urgency but with purpose, their presence subtle yet unmistakable. Doors opened, footsteps approached, voices remained controlled. There is a protocol to moments like this, a structure designed to hold chaos at bay even when the reality inside threatens to break through it. Inside, the air felt different. Not in a way that could be measured or described in reports, but in a way that every investigator recognizes the moment they cross the threshold. A density. A stillness that is no longer neutral. The house, staged only hours earlier to feel welcoming and full of possibility, now held something final, something that could not be rearranged or softened by lighting or careful presentation. Lindsay Buziak lay where she had fallen, the violence of the act preserved in the position of her body, in the marks left behind, in the absence of movement where there should have been life. Paramedics moved quickly, but not with the expectation of saving her. That realization comes fast in cases like this. The focus shifts almost immediately from rescue to preservation. From trying to reverse what has happened to understanding it. The first officers on scene begin to map the space instinctively. Entry points, sightlines, disturbances. They are trained to see not just what is present, but what is missing. To notice the absence of disorder where disorder might be expected. To recognize when a scene does not align with the patterns of impulsive violence. This scene did not. There was no sign of forced entry. The front door showed no damage, no indication that it had been breached or manipulated. That detail alone narrowed the possibilities. Whoever had entered the house had been allowed inside. Welcomed, even if only briefly, under the assumption that they belonged there. The interior told a similar story. Furniture remained in place. Decorative items sat undisturbed. There were no signs of a struggle that had spilled across rooms or escalated into chaos. The violence, though severe, had been contained to a limited area. Focused. Controlled. Investigators moved carefully, documenting everything before anything could be altered. Photographs taken from multiple angles. Notes recorded in precise language. Each detail captured not just for immediate understanding, but for future analysis. Because in cases like this, the smallest overlooked element can later become the key to everything. The wounds themselves spoke of intent. Multiple stab injuries, delivered with force and repetition. Not random, not scattered in a way that suggests panic or hesitation. There is a difference between violence driven by emotion and violence driven by purpose, and experienced investigators learn to read that difference in the patterns left behind. This was the latter. The attack had been decisive. Over quickly, but not uncertain. Whoever wielded the knife had not been guessing, had not been reacting moment by moment. They had followed through with a level of commitment that suggests preparation, both mental and physical. And yet, for all the brutality of the act, there was a striking absence of evidence pointing outward. No weapon left behind. No obvious fingerprints. No clear trace of the individuals who had been inside only minutes earlier. It is in these absences that the true complexity of the case began to take shape. Because crime scenes, even carefully managed ones, tend to leave something behind. A fragment. A fiber. A misstep. Perfection is rare, especially in acts that involve physical violence. The body moves, the environment reacts, and in that interaction, traces are usually created. Here, those traces were minimal. Not entirely absent, but limited in ways that immediately raised questions. Had gloves been worn? Almost certainly. Had the attackers been aware of where to step, what to touch, how to move without leaving obvious evidence? It appeared so. The house itself became a kind of silent witness, offering only fragments of what it had contained moments earlier. A shifted object here, a mark there, small indicators that something had occurred, but not enough to form a complete narrative. Outside, the perimeter was established quickly. Officers canvassed the immediate area, speaking with neighbors, asking the same questions in slightly different ways, hoping to catch a detail that might otherwise slip through. Did you see anyone enter or leave the house? Did you notice a vehicle that seemed out of place? Did anything unusual catch your attention this evening? Most answers came back the same. No. The neighborhood had remained what it always was. Quiet. Predictable. Unremarkable. If the killers had been seen, they had not been recognized as anything other than ordinary. And that, in itself, was a clue. Because it suggested that their appearance, their behavior, their entire presentation had been designed to avoid notice. They had not rushed, had not drawn attention to themselves through urgency or panic. They had moved within the expectations of the environment, blending in so completely that even in hindsight, there was little to recall. Investigators turned their attention to the timeline. The window between Lindsay entering the house and her boyfriend discovering her was narrow. Approximately 15 minutes. Within that span, the entire sequence of events had taken place. The meeting, the shift, the attack, the exit. It is a timeline that leaves very little room for improvisation. Everything had to happen quickly, but not chaotically. Which again points to planning. The phone records became an immediate point of focus. The call that had arranged the showing was traced as far as it could be, but it led to a prepaid phone, purchased in a way that left no clear identity behind. This was not a casual decision. It was a deliberate effort to create distance, to ensure that the starting point of the interaction could not easily be followed back to a person. The description of the suspects, as limited as it was, offered only broad outlines. A man and a woman. Well-dressed. Presentable. Nothing that stood out strongly enough to create a clear image. Even the accent described in the initial call became difficult to pin down. Was it genuine, or performed? Was it meant to obscure identity, or simply part of who the caller was? Each question led to another. Inside the house, forensic teams continued their work, moving slowly, methodically. Every surface examined. Every potential trace collected. The goal was not just to find evidence, but to preserve it in a way that would stand up to scrutiny, that could be analyzed repeatedly as new techniques and perspectives emerged. But as the hours passed, a realization began to settle in. This was not going to be a straightforward case. There was no immediate suspect to pursue, no clear motive to anchor the investigation, no obvious mistake left behind by the perpetrators that could be quickly exploited. Instead, there was a scene that suggested intelligence, preparation, discipline, the kind of combination that makes cases difficult not because there is no evidence, but because the evidence does not point clearly in any one direction. Outside, the night deepened, and the presence of law enforcement transformed the once quiet street into something else. Neighbors watched from windows, from behind curtains, their sense of safety shifting in real time. The knowledge that something like this could happen here, in a place defined by its calm, began to take hold. But inside the house, the focus remained singular. What happened? Who did this? And how had they managed to do it so cleanly, so quickly, and then disappear without a trace? The answers were not in plain sight. They were buried in details that would need to be revisited, reconsidered, and reinterpreted over time. Because this was not a scene that would give up its secrets easily. It would require patience, persistence, and the willingness to follow even the faintest thread, no matter how uncertain, in the hope that it might eventually lead somewhere solid. As the initial processing of the scene came to an end and the house was prepared to be released back into the custody of the investigation, one thing was already clear. This case would not be defined by what was found in those first hours. It would be defined by what was missing. And by the long, difficult effort to understand why. In the days that followed, the investigation did not move forward in a straight line. It expanded outward, branching into possibilities that seemed, at first, equally plausible, then gradually collapsing under their own weight as evidence failed to support them. This is often how complex cases begin, not with clarity, but with a widening field of uncertainty where every direction feels worth pursuing, at least until it isn't. The name at the center of it all, Lindsay Buziak, became more than a victim profile. It became a focal point around which investigators began to reconstruct an entire world. Her routines, her relationships, her recent movements, her communications, everything was examined, not just for what it revealed directly, but for what it might imply indirectly. Because if this had been a targeted attack, and all signs suggested that it was, then the answer was not just in what happened that night, but in what led up to it. The first and most immediate layer of investigation centered on the people closest to her. This is not a reflection of suspicion so much as necessity. Statistically, violence is often rooted in proximity. Relationships leave traces, emotional or otherwise, and those traces can lead to motive. Friends were interviewed. Family members were asked to recount recent conversations, subtle changes in behavior, anything that might hint at stress, conflict, or fear. Her boyfriend, who had been waiting outside the house that night, became a central figure in the early timeline. His account was detailed, consistent, and, in many ways, painfully straightforward. He had been there as a precaution, not because of any specific threat, but because something had felt slightly off. He described the arrival of the couple, their calm demeanor, the normalcy of their appearance. He described the passage of time, the growing unease, the decision to go inside. And then, the moment that would remain fixed in his memory, unchanging, impossible to reinterpret. Investigators scrutinized every aspect of his statement. Not out of assumption, but because any gap, any inconsistency, could alter the direction of the case. But the more they examined, the more his account aligned with the physical evidence. The timeline held. His presence outside explained why the perpetrators would have needed to act quickly, why there had been no prolonged interaction. He was, in many ways, a boundary, one that the attackers had been aware of, one that they had calculated into their plan. And that realization shifted the focus outward again. Because if the killers knew someone was waiting outside, or at least considered that possibility, it suggested a level of awareness that went beyond a random encounter. It implied that they had either observed Lindsay beforehand, understood her habits, or anticipated that she might not be entirely alone. From there, attention turned to her professional life. Real estate is a field that brings individuals into contact with a wide range of people, many of whom remain strangers even after multiple interactions. Open houses, private showings, client meetings, each one a potential point of contact, each one a moment where information is exchanged, where impressions are formed. Investigators began mapping her recent transactions, her client list, the properties she had been involved with. They looked for patterns, for names that appeared more than once, for interactions that might have stood out as unusual. The call that had arranged the fatal showing became a central piece of this puzzle, not because it provided answers, but because it represented a deliberate entry point into her professional world. The prepaid phone used to make that call was traced as far as possible, but it led nowhere definitive. Purchased anonymously, used briefly, then discarded. It was a dead end, but not an accidental one. It was a dead end by design. The description of the callers, and later the couple who arrived at the house, remained frustratingly vague. A man and a woman. Well-dressed. Polite. Nothing distinctive enough to anchor an identification. Even the accent that had initially stood out became a point of uncertainty. Witnesses often remember accents as stronger or more defined than they actually are, especially when recalling events after the fact. Was it truly European, or simply perceived that way? Was it consistent, or did it shift? These questions mattered, but they did not produce clear answers. As the investigation deepened, a more unsettling possibility began to take shape. What if this was not rooted in her professional life at all? What if the connection lay elsewhere? Rumors began to surface, as they often do in cases that resist easy explanation. Whispers about possible links to individuals involved in drug trafficking. Suggestions that Lindsay may have, at some point, been connected directly or indirectly to people operating in that world. These were not confirmed facts, but they were persistent enough to warrant attention. Investigators approached these leads cautiously. The line between rumor and reality can be thin, especially when filtered through second-hand accounts and speculation. But they followed the threads, examining known associates, looking for overlaps between her social circle and individuals with criminal histories. The goal was not to confirm the rumors, but to test them. To see if they held up under scrutiny. In some cases, there were connections, but none that clearly established a motive. No evidence that she had been directly involved in anything that would make her a target. No indication that she possessed information that someone would go to such lengths to silence. And yet, the precision of the crime continued to suggest that it was not random. This tension, between the lack of a clear motive and the evidence of careful planning, became one of the defining challenges of the case. Investigators also explored the possibility of mistaken identity. Could Lindsay have been targeted in error? Could the killers have intended to meet someone else, someone connected to the property or the listing, and acted under a false assumption? It was a theory that, on the surface, offered a way to reconcile the lack of a clear motive with the level of planning involved. But the more it was examined, the less it seemed to fit. The arrangement of the meeting, the direct communication, the specificity of the request all pointed toward her, not someone else. A mistake of that magnitude would require a breakdown in the planning process that seemed inconsistent with the overall execution of the crime. Another avenue of investigation focused on the idea of a contract killing. The efficiency, the lack of evidence, the absence of personal items, taken all of these elements aligned with cases where the objective is singular and clearly defined. In such scenarios, the perpetrators are not driven by emotion or personal conflict, but by instruction. They are there to complete a task, nothing more. If that were the case, then the real question shifted again. Who would have ordered it? And why? This line of inquiry opened up a different kind of challenge. Contract killings often involve layers of separation between the person who orders the act and the person who carries it out. Each layer designed to obscure the connection, to create plausible deniability, to ensure that even if one part of the chain is exposed, the others remain hidden. Investigators searched for financial anomalies, for sudden changes in behavior among individuals connected to Lindsay, for any sign that someone might have had both the motive and the means to arrange such an act. But again, nothing definitive emerged. Leads came in from the public, as they always do. Tips, sightings, recollections of people who believed they had seen something relevant. Each one was documented, assessed, followed as far as it could go. Some led nowhere quickly. Others required more time, more resources, only to eventually reach the same conclusion. No connection. No confirmation. No resolution. As weeks turned into months, the investigation began to feel less like a straight path and more like a series of circles, each one expanding outward but failing to intersect in a meaningful way. The same questions resurfaced, framed differently, approached from new angles, but still unanswered. Who were the couple? How did they know Lindsay? Why her? How did they manage to leave so little behind? The lack of progress was not due to a lack of effort. It was the result of a crime that had been constructed to resist exactly this kind of scrutiny. Every step taken by the perpetrators seemed to anticipate the investigation that would follow. Every detail, or lack thereof, worked to obscure rather than reveal. And yet, investigators continued. Because cases like this do not simply fade. They linger. They demand attention, even when they refuse to provide answers. The house in Sanic eventually returned to its quiet existence, the visible signs of what had happened removed, the space restored as much as possible to its original state. But the story did not end there. It could not. Too many questions remained, too many threads left unresolved. For those working the case, the challenge became not just finding answers, but maintaining the belief that answers could still be found. That somewhere, within the fragments, within the details that seemed insignificant, there was something that had been missed. Something that, if seen from the right angle, could shift the entire understanding of what had happened. But until that moment came, if it ever did, the investigation remained suspended. Not closed. Not solved. Just waiting. And in that waiting, the mystery deepened. Because sometimes, the most unsettling cases are not the ones with too many answers. They are the ones with none that fit. There is a point in every long investigation where the search for answers begins to shift shape. It stops being about immediate breakthroughs and becomes something slower, more deliberate, almost archaeological in nature. Layers are revisited, assumptions are questioned, details once dismissed are pulled back into focus. It is not a moment of clarity, not yet, but it carries the feeling that something small, fragile, easily overlooked might still be waiting beneath the surface. In the case of Lindsay Buziak, that shift did not come quickly. It took time for the initial noise of the investigation to settle, for the most obvious leads to be exhausted, for the sense of urgency to give way to something quieter but no less persistent. And when that transition happened, it did not announce itself as a breakthrough. It emerged as a series of subtle realizations, each one incomplete on its own, but together forming the outline of something more coherent. The first of these realizations centered on the phone call. At the beginning, it had been treated as a starting point, a piece of the timeline that led into the event itself. But as investigators returned to it, examining not just what it contained but how it had been constructed, it began to look less like a simple initiation and more like a carefully designed mechanism. The use of a prepaid phone was expected, almost standard in cases involving deliberate anonymity. But the timing of its activation, The limited window in which it was used, and the absence of any additional activity suggested a level of discipline that stood out. This was not someone improvising. This was someone following a plan that extended beyond the immediate interaction. More importantly, the content of the call began to reveal something else. The way the property was described, the urgency expressed, the insistence on a specific type of home, these were not random choices. They were tailored, designed to elicit a particular response. To ensure that Lindsay would be the one to handle the showing, or at the very least, that the request would not be passed off or delayed. This raised a critical question. How did they know how to reach her? Real estate agents are not hidden figures, but neither are they entirely exposed. Contact information exists, but it is often filtered through agencies, listings, or professional networks. For someone to reach her directly, to engage her in a way that felt legitimate, required a certain level of familiarity with how that system worked. It suggested prior observation. Not necessarily close or prolonged, but enough to understand the structure of her work, enough to navigate it without drawing attention. From there, attention returned to the timeline of the day itself. Investigators began to reconstruct not just the final 15 minutes, but the hours leading up to them. Where she had been, who she had spoken to, what had been scheduled, cancelled, or changed. The goal was to identify any deviation from routine, any moment where the pattern of her day had been influenced, even subtly. And within that reconstruction, something began to stand out. The showing itself had been arranged with unusual precision. Not just in terms of location, but in timing. Early evening, when visibility outside would be limited but not entirely absent. A moment when neighbors would be home, but not necessarily attentive to the comings and goings on the street. A time when the transition between day and night created a kind of natural cover. It was a narrow window, but an effective one. And it implied that whoever planned this had considered not just the target, but the environment in which the act would take place. Another detail, small but persistent, began to draw more attention. The presence of her boyfriend outside the house. Initially, this had been seen as a variable, something the perpetrators may or may not have anticipated. But as the investigation deepened, the question shifted. What if they had known? Not with absolute certainty, but as a possibility. If they had observed her before, if they had watched her conduct showings, they might have seen patterns. Not every showing would involve someone waiting outside, but the possibility of it could not be ignored. And yet, they proceeded. Which suggests one of two things. Either they were confident enough in their ability to act quickly that the presence of another person nearby did not deter them. Or they had calculated that the risk was manageable. Neither option points to inexperience. Both point to control. As these pieces began to align, a broader picture started to form. Not a complete one, but one that carried a different weight than the scattered theories that had come before. It was no longer just about identifying suspects or tracing connections. It was about understanding the structure of the crime itself. This was not opportunistic. It was not reactive. It was constructed. And within that construction, there were patterns. Patterns that could be studied, compared, tested against other cases. Investigators began looking beyond the immediate boundaries of the case, searching for similarities in other unsolved crimes. Instances where perpetrators had used deception to gain entry, where violence had been contained and efficient, where evidence had been minimized to an unusual degree. These comparisons did not produce a direct match, but they did reinforce a key idea. The individuals responsible for this crime were not operating blindly. They understood process. They understood risk. And they understood how to reduce that risk to a level that allowed them to act and leave without immediate consequence. Another shift came in how investigators approached the idea of motive. Instead of asking what Lindsay had done to provoke such an act, they began to consider what role she played in a larger context. Not as a target because of who she was personally, but as a target because of where she was positioned. Her profession placed her in a unique space. She had access to properties, schedules, and interactions that were not always visible to the public. She moved between private spaces and public listings, between structured appointments and flexible availability. That mobility, that access, could have made her visible to someone looking for a specific kind of opportunity. But this theory raised as many questions as it answered. If she was chosen because of her role, then the crime was not about her as an individual. It was about what she represented. And yet, the level of planning suggested something more focused than that. Something more precise. This tension remained unresolved, but it pushed the investigation into a deeper level of analysis. Profiles were developed, not of known suspects, but of the kind of individuals who could have carried out such an act. People capable of maintaining composure under pressure. People comfortable with close proximity violence. People who could enter a space, perform a task, and leave without hesitation. The inclusion of a female suspect added another layer. It was not impossible, but it was less common in cases involving this level of violence. Her presence suggested a strategic choice. A way to lower suspicion, to create a sense of normalcy that a single male presence might not achieve. Together, the pair formed a balanced presentation. Approachable. Non-threatening. Convincing. It was a performance, and like all effective performances, it relied on understanding the expectations of the audience. As these insights accumulated, the investigation reached a kind of quiet turning point. Not a revelation that solved the case, but a shift in perspective that clarified its nature. This was a controlled operation. A targeted act carried out by individuals who had prepared for it in advance. They had selected the method, the timing, the setting. They had anticipated the risks and mitigated them. They had executed the plan and exited without leaving a clear path behind. Understanding this did not bring investigators closer to identifying them. But it changed how the search was conducted. It narrowed the field, not in terms of names, but in terms of possibilities. And sometimes, that is the closest thing to a breakthrough a case like this allows. Because not all turning points are loud. Not all of them come with clear answers. Some arrive quietly, reshaping the way a story is understood, even if the ending remains out of reach. In this case, the breakthrough was not a name. It was a realization. That whoever had walked into that house that night had not been acting on impulse or emotion. They had been following a plan. And that plan had worked. At least, for now. In most cases, there is a moment when everything converges. Evidence aligns, a suspect is named, a courtroom fills, and the story begins to move toward something resembling closure. The legal system, with all its structure and ritual, becomes the place where chaos is translated into narrative, where fragments are assembled into a version of truth that can be spoken aloud, challenged, and ultimately judged. But in the case of Lindsay Buziak, that moment never arrived. There was no arrest. No suspect led into a courtroom in handcuffs. No opening statements outlining a clear theory of the crime, no cross-examinations designed to unravel contradictions, no verdict delivered after days of deliberation. Instead, what followed was something quieter, and in many ways, more difficult to endure. An absence. Because when a case does not reach trial, justice does not simply pause. It becomes something abstract, something deferred, something that exists more in expectation than in reality. The structure remains, the investigators, the files, the evidence carefully preserved, but the process that gives it direction stalls. And yet, the need for that process does not disappear. For Lindsay's family, the lack of a courtroom did not mean the absence of questions. If anything, it intensified them. Without a formal setting in which the events could be laid out, examined, and challenged, those questions had nowhere to go. They circled back, again and again, each time carrying the same weight, each time ending in the same silence. Who did this? Why? How is it possible that they have not been found? These are not questions that fade with time. They deepen. They become part of daily life, woven into conversations, into memories, into the quiet moments when the absence feels most present. Her parents, in particular, refused to let the case drift into the background. Where the legal system had reached a standstill, they created their own form of persistence. Public appeals, media interviews, organized walks, each one an attempt to keep the story alive, to prevent it from becoming just another unsolved case filed away in archives. There is a different kind of courage in that. Not the courage of confrontation in a courtroom, but the endurance of continuing without resolution. Of speaking about something that cannot be answered, of revisiting a loss that does not soften with repetition. Their efforts did not replace the justice system, but they complemented it. They kept attention on the case, ensured that it remained visible, that it could not quietly disappear from public awareness. Because in cases like this, visibility matters. It creates pressure, not just on investigators, but on the unknown individuals responsible. It signals that the story is not over, that the search continues, even if it has slowed. From an investigative standpoint, the case remained open. Files were not closed. Evidence was not discarded. Leads, however faint, were still followed when they emerged. Advances in forensic technology offered occasional moments of renewed possibility, as techniques improved, as methods of analysis became more refined. Items collected from the scene were re-examined, not because they had been mishandled, but because time can change what evidence is capable of revealing. But even with these efforts, the central obstacle remained unchanged. There was no one to put on trial. No clear path from evidence to identity. And without that, the legal process could not move forward. This creates a unique kind of tension within the concept of justice itself. Because justice, in its most visible form, is procedural. It relies on structure, on defined steps that lead from accusation to judgment. When those steps cannot be taken, justice becomes something less tangible. It exists in the hope that answers will eventually emerge. In the belief that the truth, however deeply buried, is still there. In the commitment to continue searching, even when the path forward is unclear. But hope is not the same as resolution. And belief does not replace accountability. Somewhere, the individuals responsible for Lindsay's death continued their lives. That is an uncomfortable truth, one that sits at the center of every unsolved case. They walked away from that house, from that night, and entered back into the world without being stopped. Without being identified. Without facing the immediate consequences of what they had done. What does that look like? It is impossible to know. Do they think about it? Do they follow the case, aware of how close or how far investigators might be? Do they carry the memory of those 15 minutes, or have they compartmentalized it, placed it somewhere inaccessible even to themselves? These questions do not have answers, but they persist, because they are part of the broader search for understanding. In a courtroom, those questions would be directed, structured, constrained by rules of evidence and procedure. They would be asked with purpose, aimed at uncovering specific truths. But outside of that setting, they remain open, unanchored, part of a narrative that cannot be fully resolved. The absence of a trial also means the absence of a formal narrative. No official version of events established through testimony and cross-examination. No definitive account of what happened inside that house beyond what can be inferred from the scene itself. Instead, there are fragments. Investigative conclusions. Theories supported by evidence, but not confirmed in a legal sense. This lack of closure extends beyond the family, beyond the investigators. It becomes part of the community's understanding of the case. A reminder that even in places defined by safety and stability, there are moments that resist explanation, events that do not fit neatly into the systems designed to contain them. And yet, despite all of this, the concept of justice does not disappear. It transforms. It shifts from something immediate and procedural into something long-term and uncertain. A process that does not end with a verdict, but continues as long as the case remains open. Because the possibility of resolution, however distant, still exists. New evidence could emerge. Someone could come forward. A detail, overlooked or misunderstood, could be reinterpreted in a way that changes everything. These are not guarantees, but they are not impossibilities either. And as long as they remain within the realm of possibility, the pursuit continues. Quietly. Persistently. Without the visible markers of progress that define other cases. There is no courtroom to return to, no trial date to anticipate. only the ongoing effort to bridge the gap between what is known and what remains hidden. In that sense, the story has not reached its conclusion. It exists in a state of suspension, held between the past and a future that has yet to reveal whether it will bring answers. For now, justice is not a verdict. It is a question. One that has been asked for years, and continues to be asked, without a definitive response. And until that response comes, if it ever does, the space where a courtroom should have been remains empty. Waiting. The story of Lindsay Busiak does not end with the closing of a courtroom door or the striking of a gavel. Instead, it lingers in the spaces she once occupied, in the memories of those who loved her, and in the quiet corners of a community that still remembers the night the ordinary became terrifyingly extraordinary. There is a weight to unresolved cases that is different from cases that reach verdicts. The tension does not dissipate with judgment, it remains, pressing against daily life, leaving a shadow that stretches far beyond the immediate moment of tragedy. For her family, the aftermath is lived in parallel realities. One exists in memory, in the laughter, conversations, and presence that defined her life before the night she was killed. The other exists in absence, in questions that cannot be answered, in images of what might have been. Every day carries the duality of remembering and grieving, of searching for clues while simultaneously confronting the impossibility of closure. There is no resolution, only the constant navigation between the comfort of memory and the ache of unanswered questions. Every photograph, every note, every item she touched becomes a vessel for both remembrance and longing, a reminder of a life cut short yet impossibly vivid in its echo. For investigators, the aftermath is a professional and psychological endurance. Each lead that arrives, no matter how small or uncertain, is weighed against a backdrop of prior dead ends. Each tip that fails to yield results is catalogued, analyzed, and stored, but it carries with it the lingering sense of frustration and responsibility. They are bound to a case that has no conclusion, navigating the tension between the hope for a breakthrough and the inevitability of ambiguity. In doing so, they are also forced to confront the limits of their craft, the recognition that some crimes, no matter how meticulously analyzed, remain elusive because the perpetrator was meticulous in planning every detail to evade capture. It is a humbling reality, one that fosters both vigilance and a kind of perpetual tension, as if every quiet street and unassuming house could hide the shadow of that night. Within the wider community, the aftermath manifests as a mixture of caution and unease. Residents of Sanik and surrounding areas are reminded that even the most tranquil streets can harbor danger. The story seeps into collective consciousness, shaping the way neighbors interact, how people perceive strangers, and how trust is extended in everyday interactions. Open houses, once considered routine, are now approached with a subtle wariness. Private showings are often conducted with extra precautions. Lindsay's story becomes a silent lesson in vigilance, a reminder of vulnerability and the capacity for danger to arrive unannounced. But it is also a story of humanity confronting uncertainty. The community adapts, maintains its routines, yet carries an awareness of fragility beneath the surface of normal life. For those who study true crime, the aftermath of Lindsay's murder serves as both a case study and a cautionary tale. It exemplifies the precision and planning possible in premeditated violence and illustrates how human systems, from law enforcement to professional networks, can be challenged by acts of meticulous concealment. It prompts reflection on the limitations of observation, the need for ongoing vigilance, and the reality that not every crime can be immediately solved despite exhaustive efforts. In examining the case, analysts recognize the layers of strategy, psychology, and deception employed by the perpetrators, but they are also reminded that some mysteries remain intact precisely because they were designed to endure, leaving investigators to navigate shadows rather than solid ground. And for the story itself, the aftermath is the space between fact and speculation, between what is known and what will never be confirmed. It exists in the uncharted territories of what ifs. What if the perpetrators had been caught immediately? What if a single overlooked detail had been recognized earlier? What if this had been prevented? These questions, though unanswerable, shape the narrative as much as any evidence. They humanize the tragedy, emphasizing the fragility of life and the capricious nature of fate. They also serve as a silent warning that preparation, control, and concealment can make an individual's actions nearly invisible, even when those actions are irreversible and devastating. Ultimately, the story of Lindsay Busiak's death is a story about absence as much as presence, about silence as much as action. The absence of justice in a courtroom does not equate to the absence of truth. Rather, it transforms the truth into a living, evolving tension that persists in memory, investigation, and reflection. It reminds those left behind that closure is not always linear, that resolution is not guaranteed, and that some stories exist to teach endurance, vigilance, and the continued pursuit of understanding in the face of uncertainty. Each day since that night has been lived in the echo of what occurred, in the questions that remain, and in the fragile hope that one day, the silence will be broken. And yet, amid the sorrow and frustration, there is a quiet reverence for the life that was. Lindsay was more than a case, more than a mystery. She was a person with ambitions, relationships, and a future that deserved fullness. Her story, though interrupted, continues to resonate not only as a tragedy but as a reminder of the human capacity to remember, to search, and to honor those whose presence was stolen too soon. Her life, her laughter, her determination, and her impact remain embedded in the hearts of those who knew her, in the structures she moved through, and in the ongoing efforts to uncover the truth. In that sense, the aftermath is not simply grief or absence, it is an enduring testimony to a life and a question that will not be forgotten. It is the recognition that some crimes do not end with a verdict, and some stories do not end with answers. They persist, quietly, hauntingly, shaping the way we remember, the way we act, and the way we hope. And in that persistence lies a form of justice that no courtroom can grant, the unwavering commitment to remember, to question, and to continue the search for truth, no matter how long it may take, no matter how elusive it may remain. Time has a way of moving differently around unsolved crimes. For most, the passage of years brings closure, or at least a fading of immediacy. But in the case of Lindsay Busiak, time does not soften the edges, it sharpens them. Each anniversary of that February night casts the memory into starker relief. Neighbors, friends, colleagues, all who knew her, find themselves revisiting details that should have faded, replaying moments that now feel like fragments of a dream they cannot wake from. The streets where she once walked, the house she entered on that ill-fated evening, even the quiet spaces of her life, every corner carries the weight of absence, every memory tinged with the knowledge of what was violently taken. It is a living kind of grief, one that refuses to sit quietly in the past. It moves forward with the people left behind, quietly shaping their decisions, their awareness, their trust in the world around them. The ripple effects extend beyond the immediate circle of family and friends. Real estate agents across Victoria and Sannock carry the story as a cautionary tale, a lesson in vigilance that is never abstract. Every showing is conducted with an extra measure of precaution. The simplicity of a private appointment has been replaced by the careful orchestration of safety measures. Agents insist on notifications, accompanying colleagues, and strategic scheduling, all in response to the invisible threat that claimed Lindsay. Her story has become a marker, a reminder that ordinary routines can suddenly intersect with extraordinary danger, that innocence of intent does not guarantee protection. In a way, her death has reshaped how an entire profession approaches its work, embedding vigilance into what was once instinctively trusting. For the family, the passage of time is both friend and tormentor. Each day offers the opportunity to honor her memory through living, remembering, and advocating, but it also reminds them that justice remains out of reach. Their grief is not a static sorrow, it is active, intentional, and persistent. Public appeals continue, anniversaries are observed with quiet solemnity, and every new lead, no matter how faint, is met with hope and careful scrutiny. And yet, even with relentless dedication, there is an underlying frustration that refuses to dissipate. There is the knowledge that the person or persons responsible for her death remain at large, moving through the world with impunity, their identities unknown, their motives obscured. The tension between hope and helplessness creates a constant undercurrent to everyday life, a reminder that the story, though deeply personal, is also far from resolved. Within law enforcement and investigative circles, Lindsay's case has become emblematic of both the challenges and the limits of criminal investigation. The methods employed by her killers, their preparation, composure, and careful concealment highlight the difficulties in pursuing premeditated crimes executed with precision. Investigators study the case not only as a tragedy but as a template for understanding extreme meticulousness in criminal behavior. Advances in forensic science, improvements in digital tracing, and new investigative frameworks are applied to the case, but each innovation reveals the extraordinary skill with which the perpetrators eliminated traces of their presence. The investigation continues in fits and starts, constrained by what was left behind, constantly balancing between hope for a breakthrough and the frustrating reality of gaps that may never be filled. And yet, the story of Lindsay Busiak is not only about absence and unanswered questions. It is also about resilience. The resilience of her family, who refused to let her death fade into obscurity. The resilience of the community, who have learned to navigate fear without allowing it to dominate their lives. The resilience of those who study true crime, who use her story to prevent future tragedies and understand the darker capabilities of human behavior. In a world where closure is often treated as the ultimate goal, her story demonstrates that sometimes the act of remembering, of questioning, of insisting on visibility, is itself a form of justice. It is the commitment to the truth, even when the truth remains hidden. The broader reflection that emerges from this enduring mystery is the fragility of safety and the unexpected nature of violence. Ordinary lives can intersect with extraordinary danger at any moment. Trust, when violated by careful deception, exposes vulnerabilities that can never be fully anticipated. And yet, the human response to that fragility, grief, vigilance, and advocacy reveals the depth of resilience and the capacity to carry forward in the face of incomprehensible loss. Lindsay's story exists as both warning and testament, a stark reminder that preparation and evil can coexist with innocence, and that the absence of immediate justice does not diminish the necessity of persistence, awareness, and remembrance. Ultimately, Part 10 is not about solving the unsolved. It is about the continuation of a story that refuses to end. It is about the lives altered by her death, the lessons carried forward by those who knew her, and the enduring hope that one day, the silence will be broken. Until then, her presence is felt in memory, in vigilance, and in the quiet insistence that her life, though tragically cut short, remains impossible to ignore. Lindsay Busiak's story persists as a reminder that while the perpetrators may have vanished into the shadows, the impact of their actions and the courage of those left behind will resonate indefinitely, shaping understanding, behavior, and awareness long after that night in February. It is a story of absence and endurance, terror and reflection, and ultimately, of the human need to remember and seek truth, even when that truth is veiled and the path to it remains shrouded in uncertainty.